So,
Right.
so hi Debbie. My first question is, well, where did you grow up?
Wow, good question. I grew up all over the place. So
Uh,
I was born in the Philippines. My father was in the military and met my mother there. And so I grew up in the Philippines until I was about 6 years old. And then we moved to Northern California, Fairfield, California. I don't know if you're familiar with that, and spent most of my childhood there until ninth grade. I moved to Las Vegas and spent my high school years there and early college years there in Las Vegas as well. And only became a part-time gambler recently. I actually never gambled
it's an
until
acquired taste.
I was in
Acquired
my
taste.
40s. So
Well, so
anyway,
so
yeah.
that transition, so from the Philippines to NorCal to Las Vegas. So one of the things that I always ask people is, what was the night sky like growing up? Like,
Oh, good question. Yeah, so the night sky in Las Vegas, you can imagine with all of the casinos, is remarkable. It's the desert landscape, but then you have, I don't know what it's called, the light noise from, all of the casinos. So you're not able to see the stars unless you go deep into the desert. And so, I went to Las Vegas High School, and so a cool thing to do is to drive up to Sunrise Mountain near Las Vegas High School, and you can see the view of all of Las Vegas, including the Strip. And on a clear night, you can see the stars. Also, I was there when the Luxor was built, which is the big casino that looks like a pyramid. And I love that. It's one of my favorite looking casinos. I think now it's evolved, but there's no other casino that is a pyramid. And then the top of the pyramid actually has a light that goes straight into the sky. So that's my description of the night sky in Las Vegas, Nevada.
so do you remember much of any night sky when you're in the Philippines or in Northern California? It was mostly
No, so in the Philippines, actually, my sister gave me, gosh, can I pull this up? It's so
yeah,
funny.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
right behind
Of
me.
course, of course.
Because I just moved and, well, relative, I'm getting my house together. Wow, this is so funny that you asked me this. So, a birthday gift from my sister is this graphic of the night sky on my birthday.
That
So
is
is this cool?
that is so cool. That is
So
so
this
cool.
is Angeles, Pampanga, Philippines. I was born in Angeles City. It's where the military base.
Mhm.
And this is the night sky on October 7th, 1978, the day I was
Wow.
born. So I don't know how to read star maps, but if you want to know.
Well, no, that is amazing. That is amazing. Like an actual documentation, like, all right, this was the night sky when you were born. That's
And it happened to be sitting right behind me. Anyway,
hey, I never know what people are gonna believe. No, it's
that was
awesome.
not intentional. It just happened to be. I need to hang it. One of my favorite pieces.
That that's so cool. Was
Yeah.
there so was it like because you're talking about going out to the Las Vegas desert and you're, like looking up at the stars, was that kind of your first like kind of moment you're like thinking about our place in the cosmos or what?
Gosh, it really happened much later in my life, I have to say.
Yeah,
Certainly I love the stars and looking at the stars and looking at clouds as well. My aunt, my late aunt, she would often look at cloud patterns and she would call them starships. So
excellent.
the big clouds, and I'm
Big
sure that
cumulonimbus and it's like
yeah, the cumulonimbus, the really large ones. She'd say, "Look, there's a starship back there." So, and we were always like, "Come on, just saying that's our aunt." But no, I think that my interest in in space came much, much later in life. Growing up, I was the first in my family to go to college, and school was really a way. I was very focused on school and getting good grades and going to college and just navigating that whole, thing. And so, right now, eventually my career, my education took me to the aerospace world. All of my degrees are in mechanics. So I never believed I would be I never believed I'd be creating payloads that go to space. I mean, it just took me there, my career. So all of my degrees are mechanical engineering. And towards the end of my PhD, I was thinking of what am I going to do next? I was working on extreme environment microelectronics, designing these chips that could work at temperatures as high as 600 degrees Celsius. That was the focus of my PhD thesis, and it was military funded, so that was more for government, and never really thought of the aerospace applications until I was going up for faculty positions, and then I started interviewing. Somebody told me, Debbie, you need to talk to folks at NASA. They would love the work that you're doing. So I'm like, okay. So I talked to some NASA folks, NASA Ames in particular, and they were like, there's a whole Venus team.
Which high temperatures is important
High
on a place like
temperatures at
Venus. Yeah.
NASA Glenn. And I, of course I read their papers, but I never thought that I would be working on this work directly, or eventually working on grants that would advance technology for a potential lander mission to Venus. And so when I went up for faculty positions, I started applying new aerospace departments, aerospace engineering. And it was really when I started putting my research statement together and my job talk together where it really synthesized, where I was like, I want to do this. This is so awesome. The idea of being able to build something that could go on another planet and help collect important scientific data that can tell us about the history of our universe and also the history of Earth. I don't know if you know much about Venus. Is
Runaway greenhouse effect, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's suspected that years ago it looked like Earth and that they actually shared an atmosphere. It's often called Earth's sister planet. And Earth and Venus are similar in size and but have really different atmospheres today. But maybe years ago they had the same atmosphere. This is what it's hypothesized, or some of the literature says. So that's how I became fascinated with space. And now, as I've immersed myself in this field over the last 10 years, wow, it's just remarkable. I think, in addition to not only the technical piece, but the philosophical piece, right? I was at a conference where Mae Jemison, NASA astronaut, she was there and she said, well, we are in space, right? Like we
Yep.
forget we are in space, like we are hurling around in space. We just, our reference is planet Earth, but we are in space, we're part of space. And just the ability to think about eventually going off planet is really interesting.
So then that brings to, what are you working on now? What should people know about your current work?
Yeah, so my current work is related to in-space manufacturing. So that is a big pillar that's growing in my group. In particular, we have a mission that, fingers crossed, will launch on SpaceX 26 in early 2023. The payload is designed to synthesize graphene aerogels in a microgravity environment. So graphene aerogels are a lightweight material. It's microporous and it's composed of two-dimensional sheets of carbon. So that's what graphene is, if you're familiar with that. It's kind of like, again, carbon that's assembled in a chicken wire lattice. And these sheets have remarkable strength and thermal properties as well. They're very highly conductive and electrically conductive. But when we manufacture them in a sheet, there are a lot of challenges in just uniformity and also scaling. And so what we're doing is taking those flakes of graphene and creating like a sponge of graphene, a mesoporous structure. So the structural material would be graphene, and then air is, kind of, you could think of it as a composite of graphene and air. It's a highly thermally insulative material, and then electrically conductive. And so it has potential to serve battery applications, serving as electrodes in batteries, and also thermally insulating materials. And we aim to grow it in a microgravity environment because you can imagine when you have these flakes of graphene floating around in water, they can suffer from sedimentation and buoyancy effects as well that are mitigated when you synthesize them in microgravity.
Mm.
So these are some of the areas that my group is working on. And then we also have a new program. We're looking at crystal growth in microgravity environments as well for similar reasons. Where my group is looking at the history, it looks like there was this 15, 20 years ago, there was this community of researchers that were using the International Space Station to grow semiconductors in space, because you have these remarkable properties where, again, you have absence of convection, you have absence of sedimentation, buoyancy effects. And so your crystals can grow much larger and be pure and have less defects in them. And then the research just kind of stopped all of a sudden. And so we're trying to reinvigorate that community and bring together the space 2.0 community with the semiconductor 2.0 community as well. So those are the things that we're up to right now.
So one of the things that, like, you're talking about in space manufacturing, but I imagine a lot of these things aren't going to be just for things in space. I imagine there's going to be
Oh
on
yeah.
Earth applications as well. Have you guys already started thinking about that, or
Oh
is like
yeah. I would say most of our motivation is for on-Earth applications.
really?
So semiconductor materials are a part of our daily lives, right? We have silicon in our laptops and our phones, and we don't even think about it anymore. We're able to create large boules or ingots of silicon in order to create our everyday electronics. But moving forward, the semiconductor community is starting to look at other materials, such as 2D materials, graphene, like I mentioned, wide bandgap semiconductor materials, such as gallium nitride, silicon carbide, and diamond. But unfortunately, when we synthesize them on Earth, they are very defective. It's
Mm.
hard to scale up. And so the vision is we would be manufacturing on one of the commercial LEO destinations and bringing up raw materials and then bringing, synthesizing in microgravity and then bringing them down to Earth for usage in your everyday life, right? So
Well, so that, I
yeah.
mean, you talk about being made in everyday life. So what do you think is, when do you think that, like you and I have hardware that is entirely fabricated on Earth, but when do you think will be
Yeah,
like the iPhone 8 or iPhone 20
yeah.
something, or when do you think like we'll all have
We'll
something that was
have
made in space in our pockets?
space chips inside, and you'll be driving around your electric car with
Yeah, yeah.
your space-made gallium nitride wafers. This is something I'm very, very passionate about. Um, I think that this will happen within the next 5 to 10 years. We're going to start having your preliminary prototypes, and it's just going to be scaling up from there. Right now we're trying to get the semiconductor industry on board. They're
Mm.
very skeptical. They're like, what do you want to do? You want to do this already hard fabrication up in
Up
space?
in space.
Are you okay, Debbie? Um, and so, I think it's going to take these preliminary demonstrations, right? We're picking up from 20 years ago where these experiments stopped, primarily because the ISS, International Space Station, is just not set up for this type of processing. And so now that we have, the Axiom Station, Northrop Grumman, Orbital Reef, et cetera, being built, I'm hoping that we'll start with some small scale demonstrations, and then eventually we're really working really closely with the semiconductor industry to design those modules such that we can conduct the manufacturing at a larger scale. So, starting small with scale up research demonstrations, and then eventually moving to commercialization where we're able to eventually have these products coming back down on Earth. Yeah.
I mean that's so you're talking about like the ISS not really being set up for something like this because
Mhm.
the ISS isn't it's not like a warehouse you can just go and set up a bunch of machines and all that kind of stuff. It's probably a little bit more space limited. So what are your thoughts on
Yeah.
like, do we need to get to the point where like there are lunar warehouses or Leo warehouses, or is it
Yeah.
just a space thing, or is it, well, of course it's the space thing, a physical like square footage thing, or is it, you know,
Right. I think, well, some of the constraints are, of course, space, but also power as well, right? Being able to have systems that have enough power to conduct the actual synthesis, because it does take energy, it takes heat, for example, in many of the processes. So power is going to be a huge constraint, just as with the ISS is a wonderful experimental lab, right, to conduct a variety of experiments, but it's designed to be very flexible and broad. Whereas now we can think about having dedicated modules. So imagine having the entire ISS dedicated to a particular function, and it could be tethered. It doesn't have to be crewed. It could be tethered and we bring it, back. I think there are a lot of different models that people are thinking about. But, certainly cost is a huge factor, energy. Another benefit of the space environment is that we have vacuum. A lot of our semiconductor processing requires pumps and vacuums because we want clean processes, right? And so that's, think of that as a new adaptation. Can you use the vacuum of space as a pump, right?
yeah,
Your
yeah.
process. So, yeah, it's exciting to think about what this would look like. But in terms of your question, timing, I would say within the next 5 to 10 years, we're already seeing startup companies working on Zigbee LAN fibers, and other companies that are, there are a lot of bio experiments that have already been conducted, but we're starting to already see other companies in the crystal space as well. So
Very cool, very cool. Yeah, this it'll be very interesting because I mean you and I are speaking now because of technology that was developed in part because of the space race, and this
Right.
whole feedback loop between things that are developed for space coming back to Earth, and how people every day, not only in telecommunications but also medical, and even things like satellite imagery feeding back to agriculture and all this kind of stuff. This
Yeah.
whole impact of space on people's everyday lives.
Yeah.
I'm curious though, like, because you came to it as like, all right, you're already working on these things, and said, oh wait, maybe NASA has an application and things like this. What would you like if someone is looking at the space industry now, regardless of their field of expertise? Do you What are your thoughts on how people can kind of start seeing themselves as, oh, I can go and reach out to NASA, or oh, I can go reach out to Debbie over at Stanford. What are your thoughts on like
Yeah.
taking those
Yeah.
first steps into space?
Yeah, reach out. Senesky at stanford.edu or
Well, I
at
wasn't specifically saying your email address.
I'm gonna get all these emails. No, I think now is the time. It's so exciting. And I think the next generation is, I am just, the next generation is so creative, so thoughtful, cares about our planet, and wants to do things in a way that benefits our planet and doesn't have a negative input. And I think that there is an opportunity to get into the space industry to help our planet. And so don't be shy. I think there are various skill sets that are needed, not only in engineering, but in art and design. This is an open territory right now, policy as well. So anyone, all sorts of backgrounds are beneficial right now in creating what our future will look like in the next 20 years. And so, I think it's dual prong, like planning for, hey, we might have to be a spacefaring civilization. I think there's some report that says, I think my student found it was like in the next 50 years, we will have to be a spacefaring civilization if we continue the way things are going, right? So it's planning for the worst case. And then number two is planning, does engineering things so that we harness what's around us in a very effective way. And then advancing our own knowledge and advancing our civilization in a positive way. And so you can do that through the lens of space. And there are so many companies emerging right now. Again, there's Blue Origin, Axiom, established SpaceX, of course, established companies, Northrop Grumman, and then startup companies. Start your own startup. I hear investment is going down in the space sector, but what is that thing that will be made in low Earth orbit to benefit life? So I encourage young folks to consider this as a career. It's definitely exciting. And again, I came to this like late in my life, like mid 30s. I'm like, wait a minute, this is so fun. So
Well, so
yeah.
were you a fan of science fiction growing up, or was this very much like, all right, you were working on this thing, and oh wait, space can use it? I'm curious because we talked to a lot of people that are like,
Yeah.
they grew up watching rocket launches and all that kind of stuff, but it sounds
I
like you kind of
I
came
did
to
not. I didn't grow up. I mean, I certainly was aware of NASA and history, that, Apollo mission. And so it's funny. I was telling a friend of mine when I was young, I actually thought like I was probably like a third or fourth grader. I thought people were already on the moon. I thought I was like, wait a minute, we don't have like people, there's not a lunar station. I thought we had astronauts just walking around on the moon. But yeah, no, honestly, it came to me later in life. I was passionate about art, and math was something I was really passionate as well. And so I'm glad that I ended up in engineering, and that my career took me this way. So Yeah, I'm a new sci-fi space junkie.
Well, so that, I mean, you're interested in art. What are your thoughts on, like, what was your art form? What was like?
Yeah, so I did a lot of graphite art, so using pencil to create things that you know, it's hard for me to create to draw from my mind.
Hmm.
Like, I know there are these amazing artists that can like just say, "I'm going to draw a dragon" and draw it. For me, I did a lot of self portraits or looking at images or flowers. And things in real life and recreating them. And I really like that process because it allows you to kind of just slow down and look at, as I've done this recently, I drew an orchid and just look at the anatomy of the orchid. And I think slowing down, you're able to see the inner workings where you when you draw it, whereas if you just like take a picture or walk by it, you don't appreciate it as much. And so there's definitely a learning process. So yeah, I entered art contests in high school primarily with graphite and recreating things that I've seen in nature. So
Very cool. Very
yeah.
cool. I'm curious when we'll have the first. I'm sure someone's already done it, but this whole idea of these microgravity grown flowers and things like that. When will we?
Yeah, there's plants already. Yeah. People are growing plants and cookies, all kinds of things. So and it'll be interesting to see if we can, and it's not about just doing it. I think there's definitely a cool factor, right? Of like, I think there was like somebody aged a wine in space or something like that, and it sold for like, have you heard of this? Like,
Yeah, there's been wine, there's been
yeah,
beer, there's been all those kinds of things. Yeah.
year, and like that's great, the novelty, but I think it would be really awesome to find this application that would benefit humanity that you just can't do on Earth, right? That you can't achieve, let's say, again, a material with a particular quality, size, shape that you can't achieve it here on Earth because of the gravitational constraints. And
Mhm.
so, there are these novelty type things, but I think that if we're able to use the environment for its strength or for its inherent attributes, I think that's where we'll find a win. So, yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, so that those were all the questions that I had written down. Though I wanted to,
Yeah.
you've got, because you're at Stanford,
Yes.
you're on campus, like you're seeing the next generation start to think about, their role in tech, their role in engineering, their role in society. How are you seeing people start to feel about the way, because we're in the middle of a new space race. What are you hearing, or what are you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I had, and this was a few years ago, I had an advisee come to my office. And so, we often will talk about class schedules and, things like that. And often I'll ask, so what do you want to do when you graduate? And one answer I got was, I want to manage a space hotel. I mean, it was like straight faced, Professor Senesky, I want to manage a space hotel. And I'm like, okay. And that was just, this is the creativity, the forward thinking that I see in a lot of the students that I encounter. They're very passionate about space. They want to make an impact and they want to be very thoughtful as well. And so this is what I'm seeing from the student population.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I mean, that it is so wonderful that people are thinking about, you mentioned, like, all right, benefiting Earth with space, and that this next generation is thinking about the Earth and space as a whole system where they can feedback and they can help each other.
Right.
Well, this is wonderful. I that was all I had. I
Great.
thank you so much for making time.
Absolutely. Thank you. This was fun.
And I should clarify, are you okay if random people email you space questions? Because
Yeah,
you
hey,
did
you can email me. I don't
okay.
know if if I can respond, I will.
Okay. Okay.
Good
I'll
luck
keep
getting a response. Have a creative subject and
noted. Noted.
yeah,
All
no,
right,
yeah,
excellent.
I don't mind.
Well, thank you
Cool.
so much, Debbie.
All right. Thank you, Alder. Take care.
All right,
All
and
right.
now